thanks for having us here today. Really appreciate you guys making the time. Thanks, great office also. So today we have a fireside chat between Tomaso, CEO of Talabat, and Michele, CEO of StashAway. So before we get started, just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Ramsey Cleef. I'm the General Manager for StashAway based here in the MENA region. So maybe just, I'm sure everybody here knows who you are at least, but Tomaso, if you can kick things off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ramsey, for having us here. I'm Tomaso. I'm the CEO of Talabat. Been here for around 2 years at Talabat and in the region. Previously spent 4 years in Singapore. That's where Michele and I met. And in food delivery / ride-hailing companies, Grab, Uber, and yes, and very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on my side, as Ramsey mentioned, and Tomaso, I founded StashAway 4.5 years ago with other 2 gentlemen, and I've been the CEO of the company since then. Based in Singapore, but we now have 4 other offices, including obviously Dubai, and so I do spend some time traveling. Before that, I was the CEO of a fashion e-commerce company in Southeast Asia called Zalora, which is the equivalent of Namshi in this region, a sister company actually to Namshi. They were the same shareholders. And before that, in the first part of my career, I was more of a traditional consultant first and private equity investor then.
Thanks for that. So obviously 2 very successful gentlemen, but 2 kind of different paths that you guys have taken on to reach where you are today. So maybe I think the audience would like to hear a little bit more of how did you kind of get here, and how did you think of kind of some of the decisions that you made in terms of geography or industry, joining the different companies that you've decided to get into. Also kind of maybe the comparison between startup and more established organizations, let's say.
Sure. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can start if you want. So, as I mentioned, the last 5 years have been purely entrepreneurial, starting from scratch. But if I look back and I try to make sense of what happened, which is obviously easier to do looking back rather than looking forward, it's been a little bit of a path. So as I mentioned, I was in a traditional career at the beginning, first at McKinsey, consulting, then in private equity. And then I joined a company called Rocket Internet, which I didn't see as an entrepreneurial career at the time. The choice was more, I want to be involved with the internet. And so that was the idea. And Rocket was a professional firm, like McKinsey and private equity, doing things in the internet, like building new companies. So that was the idea. But I wanted to stay in a professional firm. And then after a year between Italy and Pakistan building new companies for Rocket asked me to move to Singapore and kind of take the leadership of Zalora, so it became more of an actual working for a startup, right, for a company that was building. And so my job kind of changed. It was not completely my choice, it just happened. It was a bit of a serendipity. But again, there I was a manager. I still had, my compensation was still mostly a manager compensation with a salary and some stock options, but it was not a choice to be fully entrepreneurial. The real entrepreneurial choice was when I left Zalora and Rocket and I decided to start from scratch at StashAway, and that I guess was the kind of the real starting from zero, not having even an office, having no salary, putting my own money, and taking obviously a different risk. I think we can go into the details of that as we continue the conversation.
That's very brave.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I came to realize, and this is maybe helpful for some people, that I think that in general, people, that's personal perspective, people give a lot of value to the risk of the company. So people should look at company risk and personal professional risk separately. So my point of view, and that was part of my decision to start StashAway from a professional perspective, is that if you join a large company, people think, I join a bank, let's say, I'm safe. But that's not true, because banks, Citibank just decided to close 13 countries. Or, Vanguard 2 years ago closed their office in Singapore, one of the 3 largest asset managers in the world. It's not that you join one of these companies and it's done. Your career, your position is still at risk. If you join a young company, or either you build one or you join a young company that is that is scaling, actually, if the company is successful, you probably have a lot of opportunities to grow. True that there is a higher probability that the young company is successful, but personally, you will learn so much during the journey, it's going to be very easy for you to resell yourself somewhere else. So I actually have if I think about it, I don't think I took a gigantic risk. I actually think you could actually argue I took less of a risk than if I joined a bank.
Yeah, I think many people believe that if you jump out of the corporate career to do kind of a more entrepreneurial thing, is that doing a corporate career, you scale the ladder, right, and then you increase your salary, your compensation, your status, etc. But then you move out, and how you probably have a much lower salary, at least at the beginning when you start your company, right?
Definitely.
You have a very miserable life probably in the beginning, right?
Definitely.
And if things don't go well and you have to get back into the game, how would corporates kind of consider and evaluate that experience, right? So I think that's the question mark that holds back many people, right? While I do think if you were you probably as employer, but also here at Talabat, someone who had an entrepreneurial experience for us is extremely valuable, right? So it really shows that it's someone that proved himself or herself, right? And
No, I absolutely agree, and I would actually argue that now even the more traditional companies, let's use the banks as an example, actually value entrepreneurial experience. Maybe it was not true maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I would guess, but I think today it is. So yeah, I think again, joining, I did hear in the past people maybe rejecting a StashAway offer, saying, I talked to my family and I'm not ready to take the risk. I'd rather go work for a traditional company. But I think that's actually misjudging the risk, to be honest, especially when you look at it in the medium term.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I think for me, going back to your question, my experience was completely the opposite of Michele's, because I started with my own company at the beginning, which I had for 4 years, and then I sold it, and I think I did okay, but I think I could have done much better, and I decided to get into the corporate world, not corporate because I moved to venture capital, but it was more, let me understand what could have done better. Let me learn, let me do a post-mortem of my company basically. And then while I was in venture capital, there was this new company coming to Europe that was called Uber. They was looking for people that knew about entrepreneurship, etc., because they were looking for someone to launch markets and things like that. And I was lucky enough to get selected. And when I had to tell my dad, it was like, so you move from finance to managing drivers basically. But I think that was a bit of a risk as well, because it was absolutely company with zero assets, nothing. Like back when I joined Uber, they had like $6 million in their bank account, and they were burning.
Oh, so before they were kind of like a much
before
bigger,
any big
the $10 billion
investment.
cash chest that they have.
Before the 250 million investment from Google, that was the very first big one, and when that happened, the management at Uber said we're never going to have to fundraise again. But then from there, again, I took another leap of faith, because there was this new thing opening up that was called UberEATS, and the company was launching this new product in Asia, and I really wanted to move to Asia. I really wanted to launch something new, and so that's how I moved to Singapore. And then there's been a merger between Uber and Grab, which was the largest ride-hailing and now super app company of Southeast Asia. So moved to Grab, and then from Grab back to Talabat. And I think I never planned any of these. And I think in life, as you said, you really never plan these things. But they happen. But they happen if you keep your ears open and if you work towards it, right? Not.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes me laugh, because I had a similar conversation with my dad. When I told him I was leaving private equity to join Rocket at the time, it was 2011, nobody knew about it. When I told my dad I'm leaving private equity, it was a known private equity shop in Italy, led by a fairly famous guy. And my dad was like, "Are you crazy? What are you drinking?" But obviously, if I look back, it was a good idea. Right? At the end of the game, it worked out.
And I come from a family. I don't know you, but like my parents have been doing one job for their entire life and never changed it, right? For 40 years, and then until they retired, right? So for them, it's very hard to understand why, people do these things, right?
Yeah. No, it's good. So if we look back at the different parts of your career and compare it to today, the path kind of makes sense. It's much clearer. It shows that it was almost thought through, but that's not always the case. So did you guys have this vision or motivation that I want to become the CEO of a publicly listed company, or I want to start my own organization and get it to be a meaningful size, or was that kind of the driving ambition, or it was just more of a take it as it goes, and this is like you said, keep your ear open and listen to the opportunities?
I start. So my first job was McKinsey, a consulting company, and if you ask me back then, what do you want to do long term? I would have answered, I want to be a partner at McKinsey. Mm-hmm. So I was actually happy, and I thought
then after 2 weeks.
It was the same. Even when I went to the MBA, so after 2 years, my answer was still probably. I said probably. Okay. I want to be here in the long term. Now, that's what I recall. I have to admit that I recently went back and looked at my essays for the MBA, which is what you write, 6 months before, to be accepted to the master. And there was one question that talked about, long term. And I was surprised, but this was, close to 15 years ago. Actually, 15 years ago, exactly. So, and I was surprised that I wrote at the time, in the long term, I want to be building my own company in an international setup. So it was actually, in fact, what ended up happening, and I completely forgot about it, so I don't know where it came from. So I guess I was debated at the time. But what I recall is that I was very convinced that I was going to be there. And when I joined private equity, I thought I was going to be there forever. So to the point that I made a geographical choice. I was in New York with McKinsey, and private equity opportunity was in Italy. And I went back to Italy probably much earlier than I thought I would, because I thought this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm going to do this for the next 20 years. Let me just do it. And then 3 years later, I decided to change, and it just happens. It wasn't planned.
Fantastic. For me, it was similar, but I always wanted to have my own company, which is what I did at the beginning. After doing that, I kind of felt, over time, I think I changed mine the opposite. I think we're exactly the opposite. That's incredible, the opposite type of career. But and now I really much enjoy what I do, because I feel, even though I didn't create this company, I do feel that, if you manage a large organization, you can really shape and change things, not just for the company itself, but you have an impact on the geography you operate in. You have so if you think about Talabat today, we have tens of thousands, some hundreds of thousands of restaurant partners and riders. We provide opportunities to these riders, and the amount of people that depend or that benefit from the fact that Talabat is on the market is a lot. Think about all these people, their families, etc. We are impacting probably 1 million's lives, right? And for me, this is really, really amazing. And I think we are all here at Talabat humbled to be able to do so, to create a positive impact in the society, and that's what's really, really fulfilling for me.
Yeah, that's great.
And look, I think it's, you mentioned, we kind of started in very different perspective, but I think on what you just mentioned, I think a lot of the energy I bring to work every day comes from a similar consideration. I mean, StashAway is a wealth management platform, so we help people build wealth for the long term. And the idea that we can help people achieve financial peace of mind. We can help families make sure that they can, they don't need to have money argument over time. That they can retire one day. They don't need to work forever. That they can send the kids to the school that they want to send them. And this is true for different levels of wealth. Obviously goals change, but it's true for many, many people at different levels of wealth. That's a gigantic motivation. And as I mentioned, I used to be in fashion e-commerce, and to be honest, well, people used to tell me, "Oh, you're Italian, of course you do fashion e-commerce." I actually really, as you can see, I really don't care too much about fashion. But I'm actually very much motivated by the idea of helping people be, serene about their money, so that they can actually focus about other things. And
it's true, because I'm a client of StashAway personally myself as well, and it gives you really peace of mind. It's a very well thought through platform.
Thank you, and thank you for saying that. What I was going to say is that actually what happened over time as we were building the company is that I started to talk to people, friends or people that I met, and people say, "Oh, I'm a client of you," like, it happened with you, right? You told me, "Oh, I'm actually a client," and I think that starts to give you real satisfaction of, actually, what we are doing helps others. People are appreciating what we do. Let me think about how we can do it better. And I think if it's amazing to kind of being able to start it and to build part of the early team. Obviously I was a co-founder, but I think the same feeling is shared by all of our, we are a small company, we're 150 people, but all of our 150 people definitely feel part of in this journey.
Cool. So you guys talked a bit about starting your own organizations and working in bigger organizations and things. So how do you see it different, whereas growing a smaller scale business or a startup versus having the impact in a larger scale business? So maybe a comparison between StashAway and Talabat, not a comparison, but how do you guys think about that in your organizations and impact that change? Because of course the scale is different, the effort is different, it's just two different beasts, so to speak.
Yeah. Maybe I can start. I always remember when I started my own company. It was a very small company. By the time we sold it, we were like 10 people or something like that. And I remember I was doing a bit of everything, right? I was also creating fake emails with fake names to make the customers think we had so many other people, and so I was emailing from all these different aliases. But I also learned to code, right, to support and to build pieces of code that our maybe coders did not have time to build or whatever. So I think it was really hands-on into everything, and I knew the business inside out, like all of it. Here, I think the biggest challenge for the leadership team is to be connected to what's going on. And it's not that you're not connected, but you have to be very selective on where to plug yourself into and where not. Because if you want to plug yourself into everything, there's a word, there's so much detail, like you get lost into it, and you cannot drive anything. So the hardest part is really understand what are the things that really need your attention and what are the things that don't. So this is the biggest difference I see as a leader in an organization, small or big organization.
Yeah, it's absolutely same point of view. Maybe if I can add a couple of personal thoughts. One good example I heard is the fact that as a company scales, a founder typically, at the beginning, as you mentioned, you do everything, right? You decide whether you want the chairs white or black, whether you're going to go for, telecom operator 1 or 2, and et cetera, you do everything, right? But as the organization grows, you can't do that. And so the one interesting parallel I heard is you need to go in from being a writer to being an editor. So you need to kind of learn that passage. And I am, as I mentioned, we are now 150 across 5 countries, and we have a very strong management team. And my challenge is now making that kind of that step. And I think there are areas where definitely made it, and areas where a little bit because of me, maybe I like to be in the details of certain things, or maybe because the organization in certain areas is not yet as mature, where I find myself sometimes a little bit too into the nitty-gritty detail, which is probably a wrong thing. So I was talking to Ramsey earlier, and I was saying that earlier today there was a meeting talking about some of the things we want to do in Singapore, which is our initial market. So that's where I was the most plugged in from the very beginning. and it clashed with another meeting, and I told Ramses I was happy it clashed so that I didn't participate to the Singapore discussion, which is great because then it leaves to the Singapore country manager and some of the other people more space to manage it, because if I'm in the room then it's difficult for me to shut up. So and so it's like but so being forced to some time and taking a week off is actually a good exercise, because things need to work without you, so just removing yourself from the process.
I just took a week off, and when I came back the company was much better
exactly
when I left it.
exactly.
Things don't fall apart as quickly as you think.
No, quite the opposite actually.
And so maybe what you can share is what surprised you the most throughout your career? So whether it's from like a leadership trait or something that you were expecting that turned out to be the complete opposite, or
so for me is I think Horowitz, like, I don't know if you read The Hard Thing About Hard Things, right, from Horowitz. I think he explains this extremely well. So he says no one is a born CEO, right? So there's a point in your life in which if you are to become a CEO, at some point you will become CEO, right? So before that, no one had a previous CEO type of experience, right? And usually people that become CEOs are kind of straight A's people, right? So they had a good grading at school and they're successful when they were like doing their IC type of work, etc. And then when you look down at the organization, you get surprised by how many things are going wrong, right? And in the entire organization, and it's just because how big organizations are built, and like not because people are bad or good or whatever. It's impossible in a big organization that everything goes well, right? And then if you were to rate yourself, you probably would say you're a 20 out of 100, right? So I think this is the thing you have to learn to live with, I think. And but then what he says in the book is amazing. He said, when you become CEO, though, no one tells you that the global average is 20 out of 100, right? No one prepares.
So you need to apply the grading curve.
Exactly.
So then you're doing well.
Exactly. So that was my biggest learning in this role, I would say.
Very interesting.
Subscribe to that. Maybe a different thing is you hear a lot about people are everything, focus on the people, and I think when you read about it, if you don't have, or when I read about it and I didn't have management or entrepreneurial experience, I thought, okay, this is just kind of making lip service. Is not actually true. So maybe I was not surprised, but as I lived through my kind of career within Rocket and now entrepreneurial one at StashAway, to see how it's absolutely true. So now the number one thing I tell everyone is there is only one thing you need to care about, which is people. If you have good people in the right place with the right motivations and the right setup, problems will come and be solved without you even noticing. And I think that's the biggest learning of the last 15 years of my career. I know it probably will sound cliche, so people will think like I thought 15 years ago, this is cliche, but the reality is that it's actually true. And it's all about the quality of the people and the setup. So I think one thing I learned is that when I was at Rocket, I was in a few situations where the organizational setup was not well oiled and well orchestrated, and there, even if you have the right people, then things don't work. So I think having the right governance, the right decision-making mechanism is super important as well.
Yeah, you have to put the right people in a position where they can thrive, right?
Correct.
And I think totally subscribe to that, and I do believe it's not right or wrong people, it's like right match between the role and the person, right? Because you see people doing amazing in one job and not really being able to give 100% of their self in another one. So that's why sometimes this is something I always say to our company, to our Talabati, is not about, if you go to your manager, it's not about what's next for me, but it's more about what do you want to do, right? Where do you want to go? You have to shape your future. You have to to put yourself in that position that where you can thrive, right? And you only know which one is that, right? So,
Yeah,
Clear.
totally.
And so going with that, so if you want to think about where do great ideas come from, is it really you have the right person in the right place and then they have the right kind of support, infrastructure, whatever it is, and then it just kind of happens organically? Or is there something else or something but more that you as a leader can kind of do to stimulate or extract that from them?
I would argue that ideas come from places you can't plan. So I don't think you can plan where new ideas will come from. I think if you have an organization, big or small, so this is true even when it's 3 co-founders, and obviously now 150 people at StashAway, or when I was at Zalora, 1,500 people. I think it's more about making sure that there is the right attitude across the company at looking at problems without freaking out, and rather dividing problems into pieces, discussing, ideally using analytics whenever possible, being creative, and on a cultural side, making sure that you allow people to make mistakes. Because if you want to make sure that there is creativity, not every idea will be a great one. But if you start shutting down ideas because they're not a great one, the great one will not be, they will not surface. So you need to just create the right environment and ideas will come up. But I think it's difficult to plan. So I think if you create an office, the office of new ideas, you're going to have very few new ideas. So
yes, totally. I totally agree with that, and it's all about the environment you create and the culture, and I think having an open culture, and it starts not just by saying, okay, you can tell me your ideas, right? But it's more about showing that there's a feedback culture where people can talk to each other, can tell each other, give feedback to each other, and where people speak up if there's a problem, and they feel completely free in doing that. But then when you create the culture, I think it's just it should be automatic. So if something is not working, it should be brought up, right? If you see, so if people have at heart the success of the company, and because they represent the company, right, in their personal life, etc., right? So it's important. So when they see something is not working, they take it as a personal mission to bring it up to the right people and say we should fix this, we should do that, etc., etc. So when this thing happened, it means that probably as a leadership team you did a good exercise. You did good in creating the right environment. Otherwise, if the environment is toxic and as you were saying, ideas are shut up or feedback is not welcome, etc., people will complain with each other and will say, oh, like our service is terrible, right? But they will just complain. Like I think the opposite of ideas is people being frustrated and complaining, right? Mm-hmm. So you can measure, how is the culture in your company by
that's a good way of putting it.
And maybe one other point is that building a company or scaling a company, it's not a straight line. You will have ups and downs, and a culture of new ideas, a culture that fosters feedback and fosters discussions, I think it's able to go through the downs without losing too much energy, like without losing motivation, without losing sight of what needs to get done, because then people are able to analyze problems, come up with new ideas, discuss them, disagree, and then come up with something, and hopefully that something is what brings people out of the down. It's not. I don't think there is any company in the world that was built like this.
Totally.
No, definitely not. Exactly. And I think another part of that, which for some reason is still taboo, for maybe lack of a better term, and people still kind of shy away from it, is failure. So I don't think you can become a great leader or lead a large organization or any type of organization without kind of failing at some point. So how do you kind of think about that? How do you learn from that? And how do you foster this culture where failure is okay, essentially?
I mean, it's a bit of a chicken egg problem, right? So because you say you fail, if I don't feel comfortable in failing, I will try to sweep it under the rug or something like that. But I think it comes from the leadership, right? Also the leadership team should fail and should admit their failures in first place, right? Sometimes we set OKRs, we set the direction of the company, we do something. Sometimes we realize that we focus on the wrong thing, right? And it can happen, right? The market can change, you may have missed some things, etc. As long as you show that from the top, people fail and admit it and it's okay, I think that everybody will feel free to do it as well. So it's not something you can tell. I think is one of the things you have to show, right?
I agree. Totally agree. And then adding one point, we were recently interviewing a few people for a senior role, and one of the candidates actually had, started a company, failed. Going back to the discussion we had earlier about the risk of starting a company or the risk of joining a young organization. One of the candidates actually had started something and failed, and in our internal discussion, that was actually a plus. So as we were discussing about the candidate, with actually on the pluses side, this guy actually did something, failed, learned from that, and he talks about it, very openly in the interview and explains what were the mistakes, etc. And again, it can be seen as a plus. So going back to what we said earlier about sometimes people misjudging the risk of joining a young organization, joining a fast-growing startup versus a larger traditional company. I think you need to think that sometimes hiring managers actually are looking for people that have gone through the ups and downs, not just through very stable and safe environments.
So the message is don't succeed, fail. Always fail.
If you succeed in university, it's even better. Yeah. No, but when in an interview, I do ask often, tell me when over time where you failed, you made a mistake.
Yeah,
and if somebody tells you I've never made a mistake, that's a red flag.
So maybe to inspire kind of like the audience a bit, maybe I don't want this to turn into kind of like a job interview or anything, but maybe share like one instance of something where you failed or you failed spectacularly, let's say, but you learned from it, kind of picked up your boots and just kept going.
Look, maybe I'll start. I think I can name a few, but let me pick one. So maybe one is what I kind of hinted at earlier. In the experience before StashAway, there was a time where things didn't go. I don't want to be too specific because there are other people involved, but things didn't go as well as I hope and everybody hoped they would go. And the core problem was an organizational problem of kind of setting up the structure at the top in the right way. And I missed, as the CEO, I missed the chance to change that early on because I thought it was less important than kind of just moving forward. And that was a big misjudgment which had consequences for multiple years. And as a CEO, that's the most important job is making sure that the organization works well, right? And that was a gigantic learning, to the point that at StashAway, I've been super focused on how we build the organization, making sure that we are we are open to disagree and discuss, and the informations flow freely because of that experience. And probably if I didn't have that experience, I don't think StashAway would have such a well orchestrated setup at the top. And obviously, StashAway is also very well set up at the top because my two co-founders shared those views and kind of contributed to making it that way. But I think my personal experience in that's one example. I have many more, but it's one example, a big one.
Well, I have a big one as well that has to do, and Talabat probably know because I always tell it, just to show that the leadership fails a lot. It's when I had my own company. So we hired. So we didn't have money, right? When we okay, this is my justification. We didn't have money when we started the company, and we had to write contracts. The first contract for the first client that turned out to be the largest client. And I asked a friend of mine who was just graduating in law to write us the contract. And he did it for 100 euros, something like that. Contract, right? So very happy to have saved probably 10K or something. 4 years later, we were forced to sell our company to our client because of some fine prints in the contract. That's why I actually sold my company. And probably, I don't know what would have. So this really changed my life, right? So this had a huge impact in my life, and I learned, one, to buy quality stuff probably when it comes to important, very important things that can impact that, and two, if you work with a friend, I think you should should not be biased towards your friends, right? You should really think about what are the strengths, whether is this person qualified to do what needs to do, and then pay them market rate. Don't pay your friends less, or don't let them ask you for less, because of course they're gonna put less attention than what they would do. So yeah, that was a big mistake. I did.
Very interesting. Oh, that's something I think the audience can appreciate a lot. So thanks for sharing. So maybe just to kind of wind things down, one more question from my side on a more positive note then. So given everything is usually what the stereotype is, it's super hectic, it's super busy, there's 1,000,001 different things happening. So where do you find your kind of inspiration and creativity to solve these problems that just kind of like?
For me, it's super quick. It will be things like cycling, under the shower, driving to work. So basically, bottom line, every possible situation in which I'm away from my phone and I cannot touch it.
Yeah, on my side, I think two things. One is, I think it's very important to detach from the problem in order to solve problems sometimes. And I have the luck of having 3 kids, and so when you are with kids, it's impossible to think about something else other than them, because they will notice in 3 seconds, and they will tell you, "What are you doing?" And so exactly what you're thinking about. So I think you kind of completely kind of focusing on what's happening. Plus, one of them is 1 year and a half, so if I think about something else, she might kill herself somewhere. So I need to be careful. So that helps a lot, because then when you refocus, then I don't know what happens in your brain, but it's like under the shower. You slept the whole night and you haven't thought about things. Obviously, you're in the shower and kind of new ideas kind of come up. So I think it's important to switch. And I don't do that enough. So for instance, I would like to find more time to read, for instance, because I think reading helps, combining ideas from different people and put them in context. And I'm actually working on myself to trying to structure a way.
Audible is a fantastic tool I use. I'm reading so many books when I do Audible, like in all those situations where you're driving your car or whatever, like you read a lot.
And I did it for some time, and then for whatever reason, in the last year, I moved from, which is okay, I moved from Audible to podcast. So from books to podcast when I exercise, for instance, which is still good, because it is still kind of foster my some thinking, but not as much as a full book that can go deeper. But yeah, I agree. Audible, I agree. It's a great way to feel some, to read, exactly. I think you get 80% of the topic, but it's good enough.
Okay, so cryptocurrency payment and food delivery platform. What's your opinion on that?
Wow, that's a good one.
I was actually thinking about it the other day. Then I stopped thinking about it after crypto collapsed. A few weeks ago, when crypto was going I was thinking about maybe we should think about it. Then so I think I'm not an expert in the technicalities, but I do believe crypto is not kind of real time still, right? I think I may be completely wrong, and there are some technical difficulties in making it a viable payment method. But why not in the future? I read a lot about, back in 2012, I was very passionate, 2013, I was very passionate about Bitcoin because it was just coming up, it was beginning, and I read a lot about the economic theory behind Bitcoin, and I think it's super, super fascinating, super, super thought through. The only thing, Bitcoin never became what it was supposed to be, like a currency to pay things, right? Now it's value storage, and given the fluctuations are so crazy, it's a bit hard to for us to manage all the FX risks, etc., etc. But I do believe in the future there'll be a lot of space for cryptos. Now, I don't think this will generate the impact that Elon Musk had when he embraced cryptos.
But jokes aside, I think it's the famous first Bitcoin transaction is actually a purchase of a pizza.
Oh, is it?
I think, if I remember the numbers correctly, it was 10,000 Bitcoin. So if you actually look at the price of that pizza today, it's quite crazy. There is a good story. You can find it online, actually. A good story about the first crypto
the richest
transaction.
pizza guy in the world, probably.
Yeah, but apparently he sold the Bitcoin soon later.
What is this? I want the cash. Okay.
Cool, thank you. So next question we have is, what challenges do you see in acquiring and managing talent in the post-COVID?
It would be great to hear, like, what's your opinion? Like, you manage assets, right? What's your opinion on crypto?
Crypto as a payment system on...
Crypto as a asset
crypto in general. I think it's for those people that understand and believe in it, I think it's good to have a tiny exposure to cryptocurrencies, whatever that means, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or maybe a bit of a broader portfolio. When I say tiny exposure, I mean 2, 3, 4, 5% of your net worth, of your total wealth. I wouldn't go way above it. Why? Because there is still a risk that it goes to zero. So if it goes to zero and you have 3% of your wealth, it's fine. But on the other side, if in fact it becomes the currency of the future, and then a good exposure on 2, 3, 4, 5% can help your portfolio.
You see it as a binary investment or not?
Probably yes. I could argue both ways. Like I could try to convince you that it's going to go to zero, and I could try to convince you that it's going to go to the stratosphere.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm not a super expert, to be honest. But I don't see, and I understand the fact that people may want to have a little bit of an exposure there. I just would be careful in keeping it controlled.
Okay.
I wouldn't put 50% of my wealth in crypto.
All right, thanks. So we have a couple more questions, and maybe let's say 5 or 6 minutes left of time. But so, what challenges do you see in acquiring and managing talent in the post-COVID world?
In the post-COVID world, the biggest challenge we're facing today is people don't want to move. People don't want to change geographies, right? Because I think remote working made everybody very comfortable in working from home, and when we hire people, they ask us, they want to stay where they are and work remotely, like 100% remote. Which, we have debates internally about it. I think for some teams may work, for some teams not. But I'm not a huge fan of it. I do believe that the personal interactions you create in the company with your colleagues, touching and feeling the product, living in a place where you can use your own product, it's important. Otherwise, you will feel very detached from your job. It will be more kind of a task rather than a job.
We were kind of talking about this today.
Yeah, so I generally agree. Then there are exceptions. So we actually have become more open to remote working in the last year and a half. Now we have a few people working remote, and to be honest, so far it's working quite well. I think in general we have learned to work remotely, and hopefully that's a skill. That's a good thing of COVID. If you want to see some silver lining in the craziness of the last year and a half. But I tend to agree that in general there is something about personal meetings that is difficult to kind of not replicate. So the good thing is that if you, in a post-COVID world, so when you can travel and kind of people can meet, you could argue that even if you have remote workers, you can still structure in a way that once every X period of time, people meet. So at least you can develop personal relationships, which is, I think, the most difficult thing about being remote. We were discussing with Ramsey the fact that we in practice opened the Dubai office remotely because we did a year ago in the middle of COVID, and we now, as I mentioned a couple of times, we are now 150 people. And Ramsey, after 1 year of working with StashAway, he only met 2 people out of excluding the Dubai office. So he met me because I came a couple of times, and another guy that came here at the beginning. In normal times, he would have met everyone. He would have been to Singapore a few times. People from Singapore would have been here, and that makes a gigantic difference on how you can kind of make decisions and discuss things.
Thank you. The next couple of questions are a little bit more about StashAway, but so the audience is asking, what do you mean by personalized / sophisticated investing? And then what are the potential synergies, I guess, between Talabat and StashAway?
Yeah, so I guess I'll take the first one. So StashAway is a platform that helps people like the three of us and everybody that is listening to build wealth for the long term. So we're not telling you you're going to double your money tomorrow. We are telling you we help you build your retirement plan. We help you build the kids' university fund because you want to make sure that you can give wings to your kids if they deserve so. Or whatever your goals might be. You want to travel the world and take a year off, whatever the goals might be. And the way we do this is through a platform that makes it very simple and very cost effective to invest intelligently. So the question is on the sophistication of the investment framework. It's kind of the third point I mentioned. So invest intelligently. I would need an hour to explain it in detail, so I'll do a 10-second version, which is that we focus on what matters, which is asset allocation. So the idea of how much money do I want to invest in North American equities versus long-term bonds versus short-term bonds versus gold versus real estate. So it's 10% in gold, 15% in gold, or 5% in gold. That decision is much more important than deciding, once you decided to invest 20% in North American equities, whether to invest in Microsoft, Amazon, or Google. So the idea is we focus on the right thing, asset allocation, and we do it in a systematic way that similar to what large institutional investors, the sovereign wealth funds, would do. And we make it available to anybody with a very, very clean app on your phone, on your desktop, that is very low cost. The combination of all of this helps achieve nice, stable returns over time, which in the long term will enable you to retire, to achieve peace of mind, as I mentioned earlier. I think that's the core topic.
And you don't have to talk with all those shady consultants that call you every day. Hey, come to my office, or they come visit your office to build your retirement plan or whatever. You always feel they're sending you some crap. Yeah. I mean, for me, that's the biggest about that. Like, you have an app and you don't talk with anyone.
No, it's true that. So exactly. So you can do everything without ever talking to anybody. Yeah. But on the other side, if you want to talk to somebody, you call us, and we pick up the phone in 8 seconds. And there is a WhatsApp button on the app where you can chat with a human being. If you want to. Like, if you don't want to, you can, as you mentioned, you can just be by yourself.
Thank you. So we have like 30 seconds left. So on the potential synergies, I guess, between Talabat and StashAway, I don't think any of us have thought of that before, but kind of creative thinking on the fly.
Look, I think I'm thinking things we do that can help Talabat, or helping the Talabati. I think you guys call
Talabati, yes.
Helping the Talabati think about their money in the right way. So maybe educationally, we have something called StashAway Academy, which is free on the app or on webinars, and we do it also for companies where we kind of explain basic concepts on financial planning and investing, or more advanced concepts as well. So we actually have a curriculum. So I think that's one area where I think we can.
And I think we're doing something at the office, right?
Yeah, a couple of weeks from now.
Yeah, a couple of weeks from now we're
exactly.
going to have
So that's exactly the point, and I think that's the one thing that comes to my mind.
And we can deliver you food, guys, at the office.
Exactly, which is happening already. It's happening already.
So thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. Hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Ramsey.
Thank you, Ramsey. Thank you, Tomaso. Also, thank you for your support as a client. Thanks a lot.